Hello, in this video I want to try and answer the question that is often asked in popular culture both by comedians and sometimes historians, and that is if you had a time machine, should you go back in time and kill Hitler? And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to answer the question of what would have happened had he died in 1923, that is the year of the beer hall coup. But in my opinion, what people kind of actually want to ask when they consider killing Hitler in 1923 or before he became the Chancellor of Germany is they want to ask the question, what would have happened had fascism not come to power in Germany? And the problem with this assumption that killing Hitler could stop fascism from rising is that you can't really defeat an idea just by killing one extraordinary guy, one evil person. Because if you don't address the underlying conditions, I think that there is a solid chance that fascism, in this case even the very same party, the Nazi party, would still come to power, even without Hitler. They still had Goebbels. There were still underlying conditions that would have made the Nazi party popular. But even if we assume that something different would have happened, perhaps the communists would have came to power or something like that. But the point of this video is that most other scenarios in this chaotic and dark period of human history, and that is the world after World War I, where colonialism was at its peak, where democracy was still a fresh system that was freshly implemented in many countries and didn't really work due to just extreme right-wingers and left-wingers killing each other in the streets. And the fact that democracy didn't work is much more complicated than just the existence of Hitler and even the existence of fascism, because parliamentary systems were new. Multiple political parties often couldn't agree on anything, including the size of the stimulus that the German people were desperately waiting to happen. So, okay, in this video I want to try and answer the question, what if Hitler was killed in 1923? Here you can see how the Nazi artists depict the beer hall coup. And by the way, anybody that claims they know exactly what would have happened in this scenario is just crazy. So I'm going to address multiple scenarios in this video, and as already said, most of them are actually worse than what happened in our timeline. The beer hall coup resulted in death of 16 Nazis, 3 police officers and 1 innocent bystander. And let us imagine in this scenario that on the surface at least we got lucky, and among the 16 Nazis there was Hitler that got shot and not only his supporters. But and we can also imagine that perhaps the Weimar Republic simply had harder punishments for doing a coup at the time, because what is absurd is that Hitler served only 9 months in jail for his attempt to do a coup. And the similar observation was made by Overy about Stalin. Stalin was also in jail for essentially trying to do a communist coup, or at least being a member of a party that was trying to do it. And he also didn't serve that much. And had the Weimar Republic and the Russian Empire treated all of their political enemies in the similar way in which Hitler and Stalin treated them, well, then we would be talking about a different history, a history in which Hitler and Stalin simply spend a lot of time in jail and are simply too old and too late to do anything. I mean, let us imagine that in 1933 Hitler just gets out of jail. Well, he would still have to unify the Nazi party, deal with all the different fractions within it, and by the time he would be over, there would be no Great Recession anymore. And we can also imagine that Hitler, for example, got shot on the battlefield. After all, there was that interesting story from World War I in which two German battalions stumbled upon each other in the mist, and they mistook each other for the French military, and they began to shoot at each other. And one battalion got almost completely annihilated. There was only one man standing at the end of the battle in that battalion, and that man's name was Adolf Hitler. So it almost appears that like the universe was preserving this guy to do something horrible. And then he also later almost died from poisonous gas. What many people don't actually know is that Hitler spent quite a lot of time in the hospital recovering from poisonous gas. He was blind for a few months, and then when he woke up, he realized that Germany is about to capitulate, which traumatized him in a similar way in which it traumatized many other veterans that ended up believing the stab in the back myth. And they blamed the Jews and the Bolsheviks for the defeat that was in reality determined by many factors, such as United States entering the war and using a newly modified model of shotgun, Winchester 97. But okay, I digress. So what I do have to admit is that Hitler was a uniquely charismatic person, and he was at that particular point in history uniquely appealing to the German voters. And why is that? Well, precisely the reason why the establishment hated Hitler, and that was the fact that he wasn't from a line of Prussian elite aristocracy like Hindenburg and many other candidates. They hated him because he was a nobody. Nobody even knew his name before he became a politician. He even used to be homeless before the war. And the German people liked him precisely because he was a nobody, just like them. But the thing is, yeah, as I already said, even without him, the Nazis would have still had the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles on their side, and they still would have had the crisis of capitalism on their side. And these two things kind of inevitably led to the German people getting radicalized and seeing only extreme options as something good that can save them from doom. But what is imaginable is that without this charisma and appeal of Hitler, that was, as I already said, in a very unique historical position, suddenly in this era of populism, it was an advantage that he was a nobody and that he was homeless before the war and that he worked crazy jobs for very low pay, and that he almost died in the war and that he received the Cross of Iron. All of those things made the German people kind of sympathize with Hitler, and Hitler, even on multiple occasions in his speeches, used to say, I'm one of you, I came from the people. And none of the Prussian elites that were more reasonable, like Hindenburg, couldn't really make that case. But let us imagine that due to a lack of a charismatic leader, the Nazi party fractures and the right-wing vote gets split. That was a real possibility, and Hitler had to spend a lot of time fighting other fractions within the party, at least when he got out of jail. He had to do it. And yeah, here we can see Goebbels, that is also I would argue, the second most responsible guy for the victory of the Nazi party on the German elections, because he was very good at creating propaganda posters. As you can see here, on this poster it is written, we're building homes for the German youths and hotels, free homes and hotels. How can you dislike that? And on the other poster it is written Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, which is basically a call for unification of all the German people. After all, Germany had just lost 12% of its territory after World War I, and unification of all Germans in one country was actually a very popular position at the time. But okay, in a scenario in which the Nazi party fractures and the right-wing vote gets split, which was a real possibility, I do actually see the communists and the socialists winning. Where there still would have been a split between the communists and the socialists, so I can imagine perhaps the communists winning on their own, because what you have to keep in mind is that many of the people that voted for Hitler were the proletariat, were those at the bottom of society, and they, in a scenario in which right-wing vote was fractured, would have perhaps voted for the communists, many of those that ended up voting for Hitler. And yeah, on this graph you can clearly see the year in which Nazis just had fake elections. Like, these were the last true elections, or the elections in which Nazis had around 44% of the vote. So yeah, a real possibility was that communists managed to win on their own, because after Chiang Kai-shek attacked the Canton Commune, Stalin lost faith in collaboration with the Social Democrats. He began to attack them as racist and colonialist, which was actually true, and the Social Democrats attacked him as attacked the communists as wanting to end democracy, which was also true, and that's why there was a split on the left. And here you can see the Paris Commune getting brutally crushed, and what happened in China, in Canton, was essentially the same thing, just with Chinese people this time instead of the French. But I can imagine a scenario in which the Communist Party of Germany managed to get actually most of the vote. With Nazi Party being fractured, it would be less appealing to the German people, and communists would get their the Nazi voters on their side, and let's imagine that somehow they win. Well, that would be a crazy scenario, and it would probably lead to war. There are two scenarios that cause World War II in this timeline. The first one is the colonial superpowers. They just freak out because one of the most advanced economies in Europe just became communist. I'm talking about Germany. They would be afraid of communism just spreading like a red wave across Europe, and in order to preserve their colonial empires that were, by the way, already in rebellion and were being helped by the Soviets even between two wars, for example in Vietnam, they attack Germany, Britain and France, and then we would have had some kind of a crazy morally grey war in which on the one hand you have the Stalinists, on the other hand you have the colonialists fighting each other, and we would lack this this epic story of evil versus good, of fascism versus anti-fascism that we tell younger generations, and we would be lacking this this great evil of Hitler that helped us condemn both racism and imperialism and wars of conquest. We would have had just another morally grey war that would have probably resulted in some countries getting beaten but not completely occupied, and as we already know from World War I, that scenario leads to more wars in Europe, and Europe would perhaps never have this great time of peace during the Cold War, actually. And I'm talking about peace in Europe. There were very few wars that happened in Europe during the Cold War. There was the Greek Civil War and the Greco-Turkish War, and the only great war that occurred on European soil other than these two was the Yugoslav Civil War that happened after the fall of communism. But in another scenario, communists, in their crazy enthusiasm, decide to attack the French, for example, or some other country in order to spread communism, but they could even make a ultra-nationalist argument like the Hungarian communists did during Bela Kun, and they could have said to the German people, we are going to restore German territory, for example Alsace-Lorraine, but at the same time we are going to spread communism. That happened with Bela Kun in Hungary, and then he was brutally crushed by the Romanian forces and the anti-communist intervention. And that scenario, yeah, leads to a chaotic version of World War II with essentially no good guys, with just bad guys on all sides. And here you can see how the Polish depicted the miraculous war in which the Polish managed to stop the Soviet advance in 1921. And that war also changed the course of history. In fact, I should do probably another what if video in the future about this war particularly. This war ended the spread of communism that could have happened immediately after World War I in Europe. But even if a more moderate right-wing option came to power in Germany, like the return of the Kaiser, which is what many in the military wanted, well, we are still talking about a not so moderate option, because this is the territory that Germany got with the peace in Brest-Litovsk from the Russian Empire. And even imperial Germany was a very imperialist country that wanted to conquer the eastern territories because they needed resources, they needed oil and grain. At least they were convinced they have to do it in order for the German economy to survive the process of Russian industrialization. And we would have probably seen another war between Germany and the Soviet Union, but only this time we would be talking about a more moderate Germany, perhaps a monarchist Germany. And Gavril Popov argues that a more moderate Germany would have had a much higher chance of success of winning the war with the Soviets than Nazi Germany, because without Hitler's extreme racism, many of the oppressed people in the Soviet Union, like Chechens, Balkars, the Ukrainians, would have fought on the side of the Nazis in much higher numbers. This idea that they are subhuman and that they should be German slaves didn't really appeal to many of them, Ukrainians and Chechens, so they still mostly fought on the side of the Red Army. But a more moderate ideology that attacked the Soviets could have maybe claimed these territories, perhaps, and instead of Operation Barbarossa we would have had some other operation that would conquer at least a part of the Soviet Union. But that seems like a golden recipe for another war in the future, because Soviets, they simply wouldn't be able to accept in the long run such territorial losses, and Europe would just get stuck in permanent war, kind of like Africa or other parts of the world. And that is also a nightmarish scenario, actually. Germany that succeeds in conquering parts of the Soviet Union. Again, we would have a lack of this great peaceful time in Europe that led to so much prosperity. And my final conclusion is, without this crazy and cartoonishly evil ideology that was Hitler's ideology, we would be lacking in very important historical lessons. We probably would have never condemned the wars of conquest, which is something we did as humanity, as United Nations. And I do admit that United Nations are still a very imperfect organization, but what is truly beautiful and what really shows that progress does happen in humanity is that after World War II, not a single country was wiped from the map of the world, which used to happen all the time in the past and during World War II. And we would be lacking in uh, in this great progress. And for this great progress, what was needed is that both the communists and the capitalists agree to this new set of rules and form the United Nations. And their mutual hatred of Hitler actually allowed them to form the United Nations. And both sides actually felt like they gained enough territory in Europe, and now they could have peace and they could collaborate in the United Nations. But in all of these other scenarios, I see no real peace between communism and capitalism, and therefore I see no United Nations and no progress that outlaws the wars of conquest that became a taboo in our modern world. But okay, it's all for this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you in the next one.